Operation Farside, the Air Force Space...
Hello, everybody. This is Fred Capicella. And 75 today. Today is Saturday, September. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Nobody is more surprised than I. September 15th, 1937 is the day I arrived. And today is September 15th, 2012. So I have a much greater memory of this birthday than the first birthday. But anyhow, we are gathered together, I guess, to hear the story of Navassa Island, what's called the D-Expedition to Navassa Island, which took place 55 years ago on June 7th, 1957. Being a recently licensed amateur radio operator, one of the dreams that I had as a teenager was to talk to as many foreign countries as I could, what are called DX countries. And I had a friend who lived a bunch of towns over, about maybe 10 miles away in Wantagh, whose name was Joe Reisert, and his call sign then was W2HQL. My call sign then was W2IWC. And we would what's called chase DX together. We would try to get on the air and see what foreign countries were available, and we would try to use our equipment to contact them. And I don't exactly remember when I found out, but one day Joe called up and said, "Hey, would you like to go on a D-expedition?" And I said, yes, of course, even without thinking. A D-expedition is where some radio operators get in an airplane or a boat and they go off to a faraway place where either nobody has ever operated from, or they are one or two operators in the past and they're all dead now. And so there's nobody on from, let's say at that time, Burma or Tibet or something like that. So Joe told me that he was working on getting permission to go to an island in the Caribbean that used to have a radio on in the 1930s when it was used for mining. Believe it or not, they were mining bat guano for nitrogen, for fertilizer on it. You ready for this? I believe it was called the Navassa Company. I got all excited in the spring of I was finishing my sophomore year in college. Actually, I was 19. I was 19, and so I said, "Fine, go ahead. I'm all in. Just let me know." And Joe, God bless him, went ahead and did the unthinkable for a 19 or a 20-year-old at the time. The island itself was administered by the United States government, and the reason that it even had any reason for existence is that it stands in the middle of the channel between the shipping channels between the Panama Canal and the east coast of the United States into Savannah, Charleston, Philadelphia, and New York and Boston. And it has a lighthouse on it, 150-foot lighthouse up on top of the island to guide ships, because it does get, the weather gets pretty rough around that. And the channel is quite narrow. As a matter of fact, in the early part of World War II, German U-boats used to hang out right around Navassa Island. And there are any number of stories that I've heard second, third hand of tankers and cargo ships being torpedoed off Navassa Island. Navassa is not an island in the conventional sense. It doesn't have a beach. It has nothing but 40 to 80 foot high coral cliffs surrounding it. So what Joe did, which is after all of these years, to me, one of the most incredible pieces of strategic brilliance I have ever heard. He hauled off and called the Secretary of the Coast Guard, of the Treasury, who was actually in charge of the Coast Guard. And he said the following. He said, "Hi, I'm Joe Reisert. I'm 20 years old, and me and my friend want to go to visit the island." Believe it or not, the Secretary of the Treasury said, "Harumph, harumph, this is completely unusual, all sorts of problems. I certainly couldn't authorize such a thing." Then Joe said, "Well, would you have any objection if the Commandant of the Coast Guard thought it was an okay idea?" And he said, "Well, I guess not. No, it'd be all right." So Joe said, "Thank you very much." And he hung up with the Secretary of the Treasury. He calls the Commandant of the Coast Guard, and he says, "Hello, I'm Joe Reisert. I was just talking to the Secretary of Treasury, and he said that he has no objection if you approve our trip to Navassa Island." The Commandant said, "What? You've got to be kidding. This is, a military operation. I can't." He said, "Well, would you have any objection if the district leader has, would be willing to take us?" He said, "Well, I suppose not." So he hangs up with him, gets the district commandant of the southeast region to gives him the same story, and he said, "Well, no, this is highly unusual. Couldn't do that. 2 civilians on a military ship." And he said, "Well, would you have any objection if the skipper of the Coast Guard cutter okayed it?" He said, "Well, gee, I guess not." So the last phone call that Joe made was, and he tracked this guy down. He was on leave in, I think, Kentucky, and he said, "Hello, Commander. This is Joe Reisert. I've just been speaking to the Secretary of Treasury, the Commandant of the Coast Guard, and the district commander. And they said that they would have no problem at all if you would give us a ride to this island, Navassa." And there was stunned silence for about 30 seconds. And the guy gulped. And he said, "Well, okay." And that's how we got transportation free. Actually, we paid something like $3.15 a day, honest to gosh, for meals on the ship. Now, the reason we were on the ship is that that lighthouse that I mentioned used to be manned in the 1930s. Used to be a manned lighthouse, but in the 40s and 50s, it was converted to an automated lighthouse. And there was a giant stash of 30 or 40 what are called acetylene gas bottles. These bottles weighed 1,400 pounds each. And they had to be, a supply had to be delivered by the Coast Guard every 6 months so that the automated lighthouse could continue to fire up and rotate and keep ships from crashing into the island. Yes, the ship was leaving on June 3rd from the Coast Guard base in Miami Beach. Joe said, "Well, I've got a car, so that I'll drive us down to Florida." This is from Long Island. So we scrambled and got radios from our friends, and had pieces of equipment loaned to us. And obviously we were now well underway for our big adventure. The only problem is that I was still in school, and the night that Joe wanted to leave was the night of I think a junior prom in college, and I was taking my sweetie at the time to the prom, and of course I couldn't. Well, it was in New York City at I believe it was at the Waldorf Astoria. Okay, it was at the Waldorf. We only had proms in 2 places. Well, after a while it gets old, anyhow. Nothing like a poor little rich kid. Anyhow, we also had them at the Pierre. So I think we left on June 1st, and Joe said, "Okay, I'll pick you up at 6 a.m. on June 1st.